questions from the audience? I have just a question about the size of the corpus.
Sure.
Because I have the impression, and you said there are many layers of annotation,
Sure.
and it says annotated quite to the detail, so just to give an idea of what's the size.
This isn't everything, so I had some slides somewhere about the training data we used for the tagger. So this is the data that, actually the Bible data you can't find online yet, it's still undergoing some revisions. We've done manually just over 4,500 part of speech tags and diplomatic transcription on about, so by now a little over 10,000 normalized word forms, Coptic word forms, I don't know, Coptic units. And we have some more resources that we have in digital format that have not been manually checked. So for instance, we have the entire New Testament, and that's a little over 200,000 units based on our automatic tokenization, which, as I've mentioned, has an accuracy rate of 90-some%. So you can expect the corpus to be a little bit bigger than that. And we have two new resources that are not online yet. So one of them is another part of a Strenuta manuscript, Acephalus 22, and some letters that we're working on that are not ready yet. So there's a bit more coming.
Yeah, you said that Coptic was on, or is on its way to an agglutinative language, and you also talked about the difficult or complex concept of a word. Can you say more about this?
Sure. Okay, Ancient Egyptian is an Afro-Asiatic language, which is one of the closest ones in the family to the Semitic languages. So if you have any experience with Semitic languages, you'll know that they're very deeply synthetic languages. They have a lot of complex morphology, a bit like Latin. Verbs inflect in very complex ways and have very many different grammatical endings and mutations within the word to mark grammatical category. Late Egyptian is a very different language. It underwent something rather similar to what happened to the West Germanic languages. It started becoming more and more analytic, and it switched to periphrastic constructions. So instead of having kind of this synthetic perfect, for instance, having a past tense that's marked on the verb, it switched to a kind of do support auxiliary construction. So I did going, and stuff like that. In Coptic, the language took it to the next level and kind of started fusing these auxiliaries. So where in Late Egyptian, you can still find some word order variation and insertion of adverbials between auxiliaries and other things. In Coptic, these things have a specific order that they must appear in, nothing can come between them, and they've become completely opaque. So it's presumably the case that the speakers were no longer aware that they were saying, I did. So if you look at the causative formation, you have things like Aftref Sotem means he made him do, and literally it's did he give, do, him, here. Yeah, it's got the verb do in it 3 times and the verb give once, and like they can't possibly have literally been trying to say I did do, doing, stuff like that. So in that sense, Coptic is well on its way to becoming an agglutinative language. There are still some traces of the synthetic morphology in Coptic, which is why I said it's not quite as good an example as Turkish or Japanese would be, but it's well on its way to becoming an agglutinative language, which is what's so fascinating, because for the other agglutinative languages of the world, like Coptic or Japanese, people kind of assume that's what happened. For Coptic, we know. So you know where everything comes from, which is a very fascinating thing. You can trace back these things and you know what they were before.
Well, the question was about how do you like you try to display the, like, you're not working on the level of words, but like something which is smaller or something which is bigger. And for example, one of the, I think it was slide 25, you had the relative clause converter. Which is translated, drinking. It's translated in English, drinking.
Oh, yeah.
At the same time as they are, while they are drinking.
Sure.
So the question, how do you, for this converter, do you have a special tag? How do you, like?
Yeah, so we do. So this is the circumstantial converter. Actually, the converters are one of the biggest problems for the part of speech tagger, because for many of them, they at some point have the form a, so just an epsilon. And the epsilon can have 6 different part of speech tags. One of them is the preposition to, 3 of them are converters, so it can be the focalizing converter, it can be the relative, or it can be the circumstantial. Yeah, it's a very tricky issue to disambiguate which one it is at a certain point. Actually, if you're reading Coptic as a human, it's very unfair to demand that of the tagger, because as a human reading Coptic, this is typically one of the most difficult things. I don't know if I have an example. I had an example in Leipzig, and I have some of those slides in the back. Yeah, here's an example. So this is an actual example from Shenouda of the epsilon being one of 3 converters. And you can see here that they all have tags starting with a C. So in the coarse grain tag set, they're just C, any converter. So converters, for those not acquainted with Coptic, are a strange Coptic part of speech category that does completely different things in each one of its members, but that all behave similarly morphologically, which is why they're kind of bunched together in this strange, under this strange term, converter. And they don't always look like an epsilon, but they sometimes, in certain environments, they look like an epsilon. And then you have no idea which one it is. So this is the sentence, and thus he gives rest to the mother who bore him, preceded by a red question mark, meaning I don't know how to translate this. And you could tag it as either one of these 3 categories to produce the following translations. The focalizing converter does something like kind of focalize or stress a certain part of a certain phrase with a sentence. So it would sound something like an English cleft. So it is to the mother that he gives rest. That's possible. Or it's a circumstantial converter, meaning while he gives rest to the mother, or it's a relative clause, who gives rest to the mother. And you don't know which one it is. So this is one of the causes for interannotator disagreement, actually, when we're not sure what the translation should be.
I mean, the last one would be et, probably, because relative needs the preceding definite.
Not if it's an indefinite. So, okay, so actually in this particular example, the previous text is a lacuna, so we don't know what it says. It could be expanding an indefinite nominal phrase, in which case it could also be a relative. And if it was a past tense verb, you could tell the difference, because eaf is only circumstantial. But if it's just f and the preceding noun was indefinite, it could also be a relative clause. There's some good examples of that. Actually, if you want to see such sentences, then you just have to search the corpus, which is quite nice.
Question out of curiosity about the minor annotator. Were there students at student level or more advanced experts just from the Pacific University or from more programs?
For which part? For the part of speech annotation?
Yes.
So for the part of speech annotation, I'm not going to say if they're experts or not. They're me and Carrie. There are students working on it, but they're doing the transcription and things like line breaks and nature of the characters and stuff like that. So mainly PhD students, but also some collaborators of Carrie's. I am giving a course on Coptic grammar next term at Humboldt in the hopes of training some linguistic students to be able to part of speech tag Coptic, among other things. But right now, because in Coptology obviously they study Coptic grammar, but there's no real training in part of speech tagging or anything like that. You would have to spend a lot of training on those. So it would be great if we could but the thing that you can get students to do with relatively little training, this reminds me of Chris Blackwell's work on the Homer marginalia, is you can get even undergrad students to do things like diplomatic transcription in the sense of finding where the line break is on a standardized text. So that's things that students have been doing as well, but also graduate students.
You had, at some point you had you were marking up lines with a div in HTML, and I was wondering if you have any problems with whatever words that start in one line and go to the next line with the hierarchical structure of your...
Actually, in this particular case, no, because we're using these talk elements. I didn't make reference to the words at any point in this style sheet, right? So that's not going to happen because the tokens correspond exactly to the divisions. There are some other scenarios I've worked on where precisely that happens, and then it's an interesting case of looking at the HTML specification. So HTML, in contrast to XHTML, allows hierarchy conflicts. And some of them work and some of them don't work. So for instance, you cannot incorrectly nest divs. That will not work. But you can do things like italics and bold and misnest them, and that will work. So depending on that becomes a trickier issue, and that's really where the art of it begins, at least based on this current architecture, is to see which things HTML will tolerate. But in this case, it's not a problem. There are a lot of words being broken between lines in this case. Sure.
And I didn't understand has identical coverage. Maybe it's very simple.
Well, you just need to think about this grid. So if something has identical coverage, here, there's some more complicated stuff here. For instance, this word, birds, does not have identical coverage with line 27 nor with line 28, right? It also does not have identical coverage with the article or the noun. The noun birds does have identical coverage because it starts at the same point and it ends at the same point. There's the inclusion operator, which would apply between this unit and this unit. So the article is included within the span of this complex birds. Is that clear? Identical coverage just means starts and ends at the same point as another annotation. And there's overlap, left alignment. So left alignment means start. These two are left aligned. These two are right aligned because they end at the same point. It's just where the grid blocks meet.
And I was not sure if I understood your conclusion. So what you were arguing for, that you have as many annotations as possible, or that you put them in the text, or?
So I argued for several things. First of all, don't let yourself be intimidated by corpus technologies. So if you are being told by XML that you cannot incorrectly nest things, then there should be a solution to that. You should not change your annotation guidelines because XML doesn't allow it. That's a bad situation. That means that something went wrong. You need to find the solution. So you're the boss, right? You should be deciding what you want to annotate, not the format. Yes, you should use formats. Formats are very important. Standardization is very important. You should find the standard way of doing what you want to do. But let's assume for a moment that nobody's ever done what you're trying to do. That's no reason to give up. It's a reason to talk to experts who will tell you what the best way is to do it, but don't let people tell you the technology doesn't allow it. That's not a good direction. Within limits, okay, but... And then I argued for putting things into the corpus. That means one way out, and one that often seems cheaper and quicker, is to just do it on a piece of paper on the side, or on a spreadsheet or whatever. And I'm arguing that whatever additional analysis you do on a corpus should flow back into the corpus and be merged together with the rest of the corpus so other people can use it. First of all, so other people can use it, and second of all, so that you can query it alongside other annotations that you already have. And that's how these corpora got to be so complex, is because we kept adding stuff. And then you can really ask complicated things. So that's how these things got to be like this. But there's no reason they shouldn't be. That's great.
So it doesn't have to be in the text. It's just you want to have the annotations as a package with the corpus. That's good enough. I
want them to be machine readable, and in the end we'd merge them into some format that can be queried by the system. So that's one of the reasons why this happened, is because there are different tools. They are good for doing different types of annotations, and you want to query all the annotations together. So you work with different tools, you import the different formats into some sort of meta model that covers them all, and then output it into some system that can read that. And it's an interesting and difficult work package to make that happen for TI, because TI is so complex and there are so many variants of it. So it's not a very uniform thing, TI. If you compare it to so Tiger XML is a very lean format. It's very good for syntax trees, but that's all it's good for. And it's nowhere nearly as variable as TI is. So TI is a challenge.
And to follow up on this, what's the role played by TI in the system architecture? Is it an export format? A format which you spoke to? And if so, what are the challenges? Are you able to export all your annotations and layers to TI, or are there any 3D?
That's a very good question. At present, TI is part of the set of formats we support, but not as a direct module of salt and pepper. So we go over kind of indirect ways by using conversion scripts into one of the entry or exit points from our architecture. There is a TI representation of the data. You can have a look at an excerpt here. This is part of the body, at least. And what we've done is we've used, for instance, the phrase element for the big word forms and the W element for the little word forms. The reason being that the standardized way of doing part of speech tagging in TI is using the type attribute of W. So we decided that as far as TI is concerned, it seems to be the case that our smaller units are the Ws and the bigger ones we called phrases. I don't know if this is abuse of the format, so there's always a question of how far you stretch TI definitions. I also don't think that type is a good category for part of speech, but it's the way it's done in TI. We also use the lemma attribute for normalization. That's not really what lemmas are about, and we're about to introduce automatic lemmatization as well, or we plan to work on that this year, and then we'd have a problem with that. So it's not that everything is in there. Certainly things like the coreference and the syntax trees are not yet in there. But it would be interesting to see. So one of the suggestions within the project that I applied for, and the one that I'll be starting in March, was to allow standoff annotation of TI in other XML formats, particularly in Paula XML. So one of the powerful linguistic formats that we've been using for a lot of different annotations is Paula XML. And one of the ideas, or one of the working packages in this project, is to give support for external annotations. You can have this document in TI, which is readable by any tool that reads TI, and on top of that, reference the elements and build syntax trees on top of them. So you don't have redundancies, but you rather annotate this document from without. The main advantage being that if some researcher comes and contributes a TI document, we don't have to alter or damage the document. There's a similar approach in a project in France called TXM. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but they've done something similar with externally annotating existing TI documents and making them queryable. They also work with Tiger XML for syntax and so on.
I shouldn't probably ask this question, but I'm too curious now too. So, do you have already an idea of what languages you'll be working on, or languages you'll be working on from March on?
Yeah. So this question has to do with the answer has to do with the envisioned form of funding that the BMBF has foreseen for this project. And that is the form of a young researcher group, which means that the positions in the group will be for probably PhD researchers. And therefore, the answer to that question will depend very, very substantially on what they come and want to do. So if a suitable person comes who's interested in exactly these things but wants to do Aramaic, then it will be Aramaic. It will not surprise me, so in the direction you're aiming at, it will not surprise me if there will be Greek there. There already is some Greek there because of the parallel texts to Coptic. Greek is also a very natural partner language to Coptic. But it would have to be a suitable person, simply. So it will depend on the personnel.
I guess it's now time to follow the suggestion of the word cloud that you showed at the end,
Sure.
which involves dialogue and wine. So thanks a lot for your wonderful presentation.